the thermometer said 108. It was like 160 degrees inside that Baron. We're going to be talking about our intensive multi-engine training and check ride on this podcast episode of In the Hangar.
God dang it. And you know, every time he does that,
I'm rolling this.
I want that video. Okay.
We're keeping this.
you realize that every time he does a take on this, the temperature gets higher and higher.
Yeah.
Okay, so so for you guys listening, yes, this is like my fourth take on this as I keep forgetting to hit some buttons and stuff. So Christy's giving me a hard time.
Dan.
It wasn't In the Hangar; it's Taking Off podcast. So there's that, and lots of screw ups. But we're going to keep going. So I'm Dan Milliken.
And I'm Christy Wong.
Speaking of screw-ups, I'm Brian Turner.
Yeah. And also joining us via phone all the way from Colorado is Brant Phillips from Colton Mortgage. Brant.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me.
All right. So Brant's on this because the three of us, Brian, me, not Christy because she's already in
Three of them.
MEI, we went ahead and knocked out our multi-engine commercial add-on in one fell swoop of just day after day, with the check ride already scheduled before we even started our training, which is a tricky thing, but we did that. And so we're gonna talk about the pros and cons of doing an intensive training kind of thing, and also debrief the check ride. So, Christy, how did you get your MEI? I'm not MEI. How did you get your multi?
I got my multi with Fox Aviation back when they were Fox Aviation and they had an Aztec. And so mine was more of the traditional go when the weather's good, go when the plane is up. And it took me about 2 months to get it. I was actually ready to go. Well, I was ready to go after about a month of training. And that was flying like twice a week. Because you guys have to remember, too, I was working full time during this. But
so were we.
well, and the thing is, I was actually doing it during the same time of year. I trained in August.
Oh, wow.
But unfortunately, we had weather back when I did it in 2018. The airplane had maintenance and kept going down. And then by the time I was ready to go, the DPE was out of town. So then I had to schedule another DPE who didn't have any availability for like another 3 weeks.
Do you remember how many hours you had in multi by the time you check ride?
So in total, I had 13 hours.
Okay.
But I was ready to go. I mean, I felt really
before that.
I was really ready to go by like 7 or 8 hours, honestly.
Okay. So you mentioned the airplane going down. Well, that's kind of the mantra that Brant has had. Brant, tell us your story about how you decided to come down and join Brian and I in our intensive training.
Yeah, I had reached out to the flying school that I had actually done my private through initially, and then reached out. They have 2 instructors and 1 aircraft that they utilize for the multi-engine training, and one of the instructors' availability was just so inconsistent it didn't work. The other instructor, availability was very limited, and so in conjunction with that, and then the plane being down multiple times, which I kind of burned the first, month or 2 of trying to set that up, it just became a point of frustration where, I was just irritated by it. So I went to a different flight school in Colorado Springs, and that flight school, had more multi-engine instructors, and was able to get, kind of slated in and set up for that. And I initiated the first kind of ground school with that instructor. And then immediately preceding that, the plane was down. And so after about 2 weeks of the plane being down, it just, I was irritated and frustrated again by that. Plus here in Colorado, trying to find a DPE that's available, within the next 60, 90 days is hard to do. It seems like everybody's 90 days or more out. And so you and I had been speaking, and you and Brian, we're doing this. And so I just, totally, glommed onto what you guys were doing and asked if I could be invited, and you were gracious enough to do so.
And you flew
So,
your 210 down from the Springs all the way to the Dallas-Fort Worth area to got a hotel and joined us. And just to set it up for
Yeah.
everybody of what we were doing before we hear from Brian, is we did intensive multi-engine training. Brian and I had looked at it and said, we need to get our multi-engine commercial add-on. How quick can we do it? Well, we could fly every day, 2 times a day for a week, and schedule the check ride for the end of that week. And so that was the goal. That was the plan. And Aviator Air out of Grand Prairie has a Baron, and beautiful Baron, hot Baron, but beautiful. And they accommodated us coming out, and basically they bracketed out the schedule of their Baron for us for that whole week. So Brian,
How does that make you feel, Brian?
how
I
did you get
want to
involved?
clarify something. When Dan said Brian and I had planned doing this accelerated with check rides pre-scheduled, Brian didn't have a whole lot of input. Brian got a phone call from Dan.
That's usually what happens. Dan calls me and he's like, Christy, we're doing this. And I scheduled this. And I'm like, okay, Dan, just give me the schedule.
See, I said no. I was like, this isn't, because no, so he knew I had a commercial check ride coming up. And that date was flexing a little bit.
Right.
And so
it was before we were going to start our multi originally.
Yeah, it was. And
Your check ride for your
Because my
commercial.
big concern was you kept talking about we need to jump on this. And my thing was commercial has to come before multi check ride in order. And I was getting close to where you were talking about we need to do this, we need to do this. And
a month out, we set a week in August.
He keeps saying
to
we.
do.
I know. No, Brian called me in a panic and he was like,
I go, I don't have a time frame
I don't
on
know.
this.
Yeah, exactly. He's like, I need to get this done. I said, Brian, just one bite at a time. Focus. Don't worry about Dan. I'll take care of Dan. You just focus on this single commercial.
So this was before Air Venture. So mid-July,
Oh, that's right.
established the third week of August. So it was, 4 to 5 weeks out.
And in your defense, I had been planning on doing my commercial check ride even before Air Venture, but we started tapering off because it was getting hot and my instructor didn't want to fly. And he's like, we'll push it.
Well, and airplanes are going to do airplane things. They go down for maintenance and stuff like that. So,
All right. So then if Dan forced you into this?
Oh, I was talking to my wife and I go, my crazy friend Dan.
everybody knows who you're talking about. So
I remember being in my kitchen and telling my wife, being like, I'm just going to have to be like, I'm not doing this. You guys have fun with it. Because I thought,
you told me that.
as it was,
He was like, I can't do this.
scheduled, I was supposed to have a check ride on Monday morning, and then I was supposed to fly my instructor back to the airport and then fly to Aviator Air and take my first lesson. It was a check ride. I'd been up since 3 o'clock in the morning panicking about this check ride like everybody
you
does.
do.
Flying in 108-degree heat, and then Dan texts me, and he's like, oh, the plane's down, there's a magneto issue. And I responded, oh, thank God, because I'm taking a nap. Either way, I'm not, I go like, I was going to tell you, I'm not doing this today. So,
Well, and leading up to it, so what happened is we got closer. Brant joined us in plans to be there. And so we're going to start Monday. I had check rides scheduled for Friday.
yeah.
Now, the DP could only do 2. So we got another DPE to do one Thursday. And so we were going to begin Monday morning, 7:30 a.m., and begin training. Now, your stupid commercial check ride kept slipping to the point where it was Monday morning for the check ride. And by the way, the DPE for your commercial was the same one that's doing the 2 on Friday for the multi-engine.
Yeah.
So so I thought, okay, well, Brant and I can at least get a jump on it, and that you'll have to be playing catch up, but we can do that. And because, Brant, every school he went to, their multi-engine plane went down. So Brant shows up, and Monday morning, what
I was going to
happens,
say,
Brant?
I am starting to see a trend, Brant.
Absolutely.
I sense a theme here. Wherever Brant goes, the multi-engines go down.
Yes, that seems to be the trend. So,
Well, you were originally going to come down Sunday afternoon so that you'd be ready bright and early, 7:30 a.m. And Sunday afternoon, right when you're about to leave your house, I get a call from the pilot saying they've got a magneto issue. Now, the beautiful thing about Aviator Air, they've got mechanics on staff for them. So it's not like they had to wait on their mechanics. So Sunday afternoon, they were working on it. And so I actually told you to hang on, but then they were like, well, it's just a magneto thing. We might be able to have it. And I think, Brant, you decided on your own just to come on down anyway.
Yeah, I think we were just willing to risk it, after that update that you got from them. So I'm just glad it worked out. And then we got another surprise, but they were fortunately able to work that second surprise out and flew Monday afternoon. But
well, it was actually
it worked out
it
well.
was the same problem. It was still a magneto issue. So that was what they were working out. So we get a call that they were not ready Monday morning. And so Brant and I just went by and just saw the plane and that kind of stuff. And, watched you, Brian, on Flight Aware for your check ride for your commercial.
Same.
Didn't one of you guys actually fly on Monday, though? Wasn't there a flight?
So then,
Okay.
after lunch, we get a call from Aviator Air that it's good to go.
Okay.
And so we had time for one flight, and Brant took it. And so that's when we began training. So we did get one flight in before you joined us, but only one.
But you observed.
Well, I had a conference call. We talked about working full time. I was going to observe, but I didn't. And Brant went up alone in the very much heat of the day. Brant, what was that first flight like?
I actually enjoyed it. It wasn't bad at all that afternoon.
Oh, that's right.
I think,
we got a little bit of a cool spell. The heat was coming Tuesday.
It was like 95 instead of 105.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, so it wasn't too bad the first day at all. I think that, the days following were significantly hotter, and then we were doing it, right in the middle of the day, and sitting in the back seat. That was the worst part. So that experience.
So then we get to Tuesday, and I start flying. I fly first, then Brian, and then you, and I think we got another flight in, and our instructor, our MEI Reagan, flew all of these in that heat. It's just unbelievable.
I was gonna say there is a tenacity with CFIs. Having been there myself, like you push through the heat because you're just so hungry for the flight time, and it's not even just the flight time; it's the goal of getting your students to pass.
Right.
So I remember flying in the summer in the heat, over and over and over, 4, 5, 6 hours of flight instructing to ensure that my students were getting the most out of it.
So, Brian, you went up with me.
Yep.
And I was flying, you were observing. So this is the first time somebody's observing. And I thought observing would be helpful, but until I did it, I had no clue how absolutely helpful it was.
I think that was the key in getting this done so quickly. I think, I said it before, if not the same, I probably got more out of observing than actually flying, because I'm one who, if you're trying to teach me something brand new while I'm on the job, I'm going to flub stuff and I'm going to, I'm not going to absorb as much. Sitting in the back, and I literally, when I shadowed you, I was in the back seat with a pencil and paper, and I was taking notes on the steps.
What Dan did wrong.
It was a whole, I had to get a second notebook for that, the what not to do. Well, and all joking aside, we all made mistakes while we were out there learning this. And so that was one of the key things, was no one wants to make a mistake. And so how do I not make a mistake? And legitimately, Dan would do something, and the instructor would say, no, that's not the right way to do it. And I would write down, don't do this thing. And, sometimes I'd get up there and I'd make the same mistake or whatever. But I found, I would recommend to anybody who's going to do accelerated, bring a buddy, because I found.
Agreed.
I really do think I would have needed 2 to 3 more flights in that plane if I didn't have the opportunity to shadow you guys.
No, I agree, 100%. 100% do that.
Brant, what were your thoughts on observing?
Yeah, I agree with Brian on that. I mean, not only did, you kind of, were you able to see, essentially what was going on with, with your flying buddy and the mistakes and the things that were done right, but just the repetition of kind of not only experiencing it firsthand while you're flying, but also being able to visually see what somebody else was doing, and, oh, I made that same mistake, or, oh, that's something I need to remember, and point that out. So that was very helpful. But I've always kind of liked the accelerated aspect of it. I agree with Brian that having a buddy and being able to do that backseat flying as well is helpful. But the accelerated aspect in general of just being able to fly every day, it seems like you build on what you learned the day before. You don't really have to, relearn what you learned a week ago, or, so the downtime isn't as frequent, when you're doing it back to back to back. So I really enjoy that part of the accelerated stuff, but everything else is certainly taxing when you're doing the accelerated aspect too.
I will definitely say you guys lucked out between the maintenance, the weather, the instructor, like everything
Well, I
just
would
came
give an
together.
X on the weather.
The weather was a little.
It was brutal.
Well, okay, but you could still fly.
Yeah, I mean, I remember an afternoon flight where I just had to keep a towel like wrapped around my head because the sweat was getting in my eyes so much it was stinging and I couldn't see as I flew.
When I did my multi-training, we had to cancel several times for weather, though, because of the thunderstorms, buildups, and whatnot. It would be IFR. I actually just went through some memories on my Facebook that popped up, and it was like leading up to the check ride, it kept being overcast. And I was like, I swear to God.
I haven't seen a cloud this entire summer.
I would have loved
Exactly.
to have seen a cloud.
Yeah.
It was so hot. But, so then we got that one flight Monday, then it was hardcore Tuesday, Wednesday, and leading up to the first check ride, which we decided would be Brant. And Brant, you had to really cram because you really only had 3 days. And what you flew 4 times?
Let's see. I flew once Monday, I think twice on Tuesday and twice on Wednesday.
So you
I
had
think
5 flights.
Okay. Yeah, 5 flights. Because I had 6.9 hours was what I ended with.
And
on
I
it.
think Brian and I both had 4 flights at 6.0, if I remember right. So, okay. Well, then you had the stress of your and one of the reasons why we did you for Thursday. I mean, you're coming in from out of town. You've got a hotel. This gives you the ability to not have to stay an extra day. Plus, apparently, you've got a full-time job too at running Colton Mortgage. So, which, by the way, if you need a residential mortgage, ColtonTakingOff.com. So, Brant,
thanks, Dan.
So, Brant, what was it like Wednesday night, and then going into your check ride Thursday?
Well, I gained a lot, like just working with you and Brian, and really going over, the systems and VMC and all of the different aspects of multi-engine training, and being able to, not only fly but do the backseat, but then just conversationally talking about understanding the characteristics and the aspects of multi-engine training that, are concerning and part of the entire process. So just being able to discuss that with you guys, I think helped get me up to speed, because I felt behind the curve the entire time. You felt like you're behind the plane the entire time. And it's like anybody, I don't want to make mistakes. You guys don't want to make mistakes. Certainly, hate to make them in front of others, but at the same time, it's a great learning experience to be able to really point out, oh yeah, I totally flubbed that up, totally did that wrong. So that was, again, a great experience with it. But end to end, I think just being able to fly, to observe, but the ground school aspect of it, being able to converse back and forth with you and Brian and have a clearer understanding of the aspects of what multi-engine training is all about was extraordinarily helpful in that process. So I think, as Brian said, having a buddy not only to sit in the back seat with, but also to discuss, all of multi-training components is, really important, really helped me anyway.
Did you guys?
So leading up to Wednesday, yeah, I was just a cramming. Sorry, Dan, go ahead.
I totally agree that one of the buddy aspects was us being able to drill each other on the ground school, because again, we didn't have much time. The check ride's coming, and I know we all did not feel prepared. And so you're going into that Thursday morning, and we're just as scared for you as probably you are. But are we prepared enough? Are we there? And then you do your check ride, and everything was okay. We were like chewing our fingernails because we were worried about it. But
Did you guys chair fly?
Oh, a lot.
Like
yeah.
chair fly the maneuvers together?
Oh,
Okay.
I actually, when the airplane was just sitting there on the ramp, even though it was 160 degrees, I actually, while they were waiting and it was waiting to be fueled, I went out there on my own and just sat in the bear
Okay.
and ran through the drill and everything else. So, yes, not only chair fly, I actually went into Barron and sat there and mentally walked through a bunch of different maneuvers.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, chair fly, plane fly, kitchen table fly, toilet fly, wherever you're at.
TMI there, Brian. Thank you. All right, so then take us through, recap your check ride, Brant.
So just kind of leading up to it, to finalize that, the night before, I felt actually really comfortable with the ground school stuff at that point. I'd struggled up to then, but we kind of did a final recap, and it just felt like it clicked more so at that point. And I had felt the understanding was there and the knowledge needed to pass the ground school was there. So then, the next day just kind of came in, started, and initiated the ground school. And, there's a little bit of downtime going into that with the DPE of just kind of the setup and getting to know the DPE and, their protocols and how they go through, story time and, different aspects of just how they do the ground school. But
Brent,
I felt the ground school.
Did you talk to the DPE leading up to the check ride, or was that the first time you'd ever spoken with him?
First time I'd ever spoken with him. First time I'd ever met him.
Which is real different. Yeah.
So.
Okay.
And you had like
he had actually left me. Yeah, because Aviator Air had I guess scheduled the DPE, and he had actually reached out when I was on my last fight with Reagan, and left me a voicemail, and then I just asked Reagan, the flight instructor, should I give him a call back? And Reagan said, no, we got everything entered, and we sent him all the information to set up IACRA, and so we're good. You don't need to do that. So I didn't actually have that conversation. And then the next morning, like I say, when I met Juan, the DPE, we got together and went through some basics and set up everything to be prepared for ground school, and then kind of got into the whole oral ground school aspect of it. And every DPE has their own nuances and differences, and so every DPE I've had has been completely different from the last DPE. So it was certainly. You just never know what to be prepared for.
Which brings up a
You're
really good
always walking
question that I
blind.
want to throw to everybody here. So the advantage, disadvantage of using the same DPE through all your ratings versus using somebody different for each one.
Okay.
Thoughts?
I'll go because I used one DPE for several of my check rides. And I think in total and not including, of course, the airline training, but I used a total of 3 DPEs for my check rides. Advantages to that is that they get to know you as a pilot. They know what your performance is like. They get to know your personality. They get to know your style. So they're not surprised or whatever. Honestly, the only con was that I grew more comfortable with my DPE so that when I had to use a different DPE, I didn't know what to expect. I knew what to expect from him from prior experiences, prior check rides. To me, that was a huge benefit. And maybe it's just me, but I've spoken to.
I don't see an app for that. You'll need to download one.
Siri's talking in the background. All right.
Okay. I had conversations with all of my DPEs, even the one that I knew leading up to the check ride, so that I kind of knew what to expect going into it. I wanted some sort of, I don't want to say reassurances, but I wanted to just understand what the expectations were going to be. And maybe that's just a me thing. I don't know. Maybe other people that are watching this can kind of jump in, but that's just my thought.
My opinion, I kind of go back and forth. So I've never used the same instructor for a rating, and up until now, I've never used the same DPE. I've had a tough examiner and I've had a lenient examiner, and only recently have I started considering doing this professionally. And so now I want the toughest instructor, the toughest examiner, because I feel like that's going to make me take this way more seriously than someone who's like, in my mind, my personality, I feel like everyone's always giving me a pass.
Imposter syndrome.
Big time.
Yeah.
I know in these last 2 check rides, I wasn't given a pass. It was a very challenging check ride. And so, and whether this is real or not, in my head, I'm like, okay, I need to hold myself to a you better not make mistakes standard, and I want the DPE that's going to hold me to that same standard. And that could be completely in my head. Does my quality of flying change? Probably not. But it's forcing me to go, okay, this is serious. This is really serious now because I can't afford a bust. So I like that I've flown. I've flown with Christy for my instrument. I flew with Brandon for my private. And for my private, I just wanted to become a hobby VFR pilot. And he was like, let's go up, let's have fun, take pictures. And it took me a long time, but I didn't care. I just wanted to fly. We start getting instruments. It's more, we had a lot of very candid conversations about what I need to be doing and when I'm making mistakes. And, I remember she sent me up with Kevin, and Kevin hurt my feelings telling me where I'd made mistakes when I landed, but I go, that's what I needed. Right. And so even my instructor for my commercial he's the ex-military kind of, slap you with the ruler and grill you for making mistakes kind of thing. So I've progressively made it a little more difficult to myself, but I feel like if I'm going to be doing this professionally, I kind of need to do that. So,
how do you compare Reagan, our CFI, our MEI on this?
Well, that's interesting because Reagan was absolutely delightful. One thing I do like, and I've found this kind of with all instructors, and Reagan specifically, any instructor that allows you to make a mistake, I think is a fantastic instructor. And so instead of jumping in and saying, whoa, you're doing it wrong, they do it and go, well, why do you think that happened? And that's how I learn. I always joke that I learn by breaking things. I learn by making mistakes. And Reagan was not to the detriment of any safety, but he would let you pull the wrong lever and go, wow, why is the plane going that direction? And you're like, oh, crap. So he's one he's not building hours to go to the airlines. He's in it for what Christy said. Like, he's there because he wants to see people succeed. And I think that's one of the reasons why I start to complain and I'm like, oh, he's got to do 4 more of these flights today.
Right.
He's a fantastic instructor. I would fly with him over and over. I really like his ability to just kind of let you go through and, he'll tell you it, but if you forget something, even when I was talking to him, he was like asking me about the drill and he's like, yep. But you missed step 1. I'm like, you're right, I did. So I really enjoyed flying with him. This whole experience, I've said this going into it, I had one mentality and I'm 180 degrees on the other side of it. So I thought you were crazy. Now you're right, Dan. I'm saying it publicly. You were right. This is the way to do this.
I wouldn't say he was right.
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
No, I wouldn't say he was right. What I will say is that there is a method to his madness and it worked out in this.
So it was luck. It was luck. Because we did accelerated for the multi, but you and I did decelerated on the instrument. We dragged that out for 2 years.
I was texting you every single week, and it's sometimes like multiple times a day, Brian, let's fly. Oh, the Cirrus. Oh, and the Grumman wasn't really instrument capable. Like,
I think we flew a VR one time, and that's when the AI started tumbling.
He did. And I said, okay, what you going to do? I said, get the foggles on. Like, this is your instrument. I made you fly that flight because I was like, okay, so now you've got partial panel. Like, figure it out. And guess what?
She was the mean instructor.
Oh, my God.
So, okay, well, good to know.
I put you in the clouds.
I know. Never forgive you.
All right, so Brant, you were the first one to get your commercial add-on multi-engine rating. How did that feel?
Yep. Oh, it felt great. Yeah. Well, I disagree with Brian. I definitely prefer the passes on the DPEs, and I prefer the easy thing. For me, I've used a different flight instructor on all my ratings, and I've used a different DPE on all my check rides. And my experience has been such that when I got my private, I felt like I had a good instructor that was thorough and went through everything, and I had a woman that had been DPE for years and years and flown in the airlines and extraordinarily knowledgeable, and she was patient to say the least, but so knowledgeable, even though it's not a training flight. I felt like I walked away with some great pointers on that. The second instructor that I had for my instrument, I mean, he was a ball buster, and it was a enlightening experience that I felt like I got extraordinary training out of it. But there were certain aspects of it that were kind of interesting when I was actually doing my check ride with my DPE, another DPE that I really enjoyed working with. He was a retired United guy and had done a lot of training throughout the airlines and years of experience, but his demeanor was great. And I recall when I was doing my VOR approach on my instrument flight, I had recently got new avionics all on my plane, and whatever I was doing, I entered, something wrong. He said, go to this waypoint, fly this, and then let's go in on the VOR approach. And so however I entered it, I messed it up, and I cleared it and tried to re-enter it, messed it up. And I think it was just nerves and newness of the system and everything else. And on the third try, I was just like, well, I'm just going to do it all by hand because I don't know what I'm doing wrong here in entering it. And so I flew it and flew successfully the approach. And then kind of on the debrief, that DPE said, hey, one thing I just wanted to point out to you is, you've got all this sophisticated equipment. What you should have done, when you were having trouble entering that, is you should have just put it on a heading and, used autopilot and, assess whatever the inputs that you're doing incorrectly, were, and use the resources available to you to, kind of ease the load and figure out what the problem is. And I said, well, Bud, that's great. And I would have loved to do that. But John, my CFI, would have never allowed that. He would have been like, you idiot, you need to learn how to fly this plane, and not rely on all this, sophisticated software.
I agree with that.
And
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Because as an airline pilot that flies airliners with, other people, I have seen people get so hung up on the automation when you should just do exactly what you did. Just fly the airplane. You've got a pilot's license. Use it. Don't get so hung up on the automation.
I guess I'm more on the DPE, Brant's DPE side that, set the autopilot and fix it and then get back into it.
Well, it depends. Are you on an approach? Like, what are you doing? Like you get these button pushers. I flew with
because there's the other extreme here, which is autopilot evil. And you're not a real pilot unless you're hand flying everything.
That's not what I'm saying though. That's an extreme view.
Right.
What I'm saying is when things go wrong, when you start, getting behind the airplane because you can't figure out the box is fine, but it's garbage in, garbage out. And when you get hung up on that, you start pushing buttons like you're trying to set a microwave. And it's like, no, you know how to fly the airplane, just click it off and fly the airplane. Especially if you're like setting up for an approach or something like that. Now, if you're having like major issues, and you're not on an approach and stuff like that, and you have time to figure it out, okay, that might be a different situation. But
yeah.
But either way, yeah, I agree with what you did, Brant, in that situation.
And I think that, and I lean a little bit to both sides of that. I do think that yes, you have to be able to fly the plane manually, but I also like the aspect of what the DPE was saying. Again, you have to assess the situation that you're in. I mean,
Right.
If you're in the mountains, you're in clouds, you're at in a situation where there's more risk of just setting the heading and flying autopilot than being aware of your surroundings or something of that nature. That in this case, I was headed to a waypoint. I'm out in the middle of flatlands. I could have utilized the technology and lessen the load, certainly. But it was just one of those stressful events where, I'm being stressed out by the technology and stressed out by the check ride, and, you don't want to bust and do that. So it was just easier to kind of revert back to, okay, I'll just, fly this manually. I mean, I know how to do that, so I'll do it. And so I think the training, helped me be able to accomplish that. But having that ride with the DPE also, made me realize that, yeah, there are a lot of resources available, whether that's crew, whether that's your systems, or, just your internal competency of being able to slow things down and assess where you are and the situation that you're in and make sense of it and, go about the flight. So it works out in both areas, but that was what I took away from that. And then the last, kind of commercial check rides, again, varying DPE, processes and mentalities and such. Both are good. I just prefer the check ride. You're already stressed out enough. You're already questioning yourself enough, especially when, it's in a short period of time. But I feel like, it's almost like going to an event or a show or something where, you kind of go into these, work type events where you're like, geez, maybe I'll get one nugget out of this thing, but 99% of it's going to be a waste of my time. In some respects, I kind of feel like that with the check rides. I feel like, if I can take away one nugget, but the other 99%, I'm going to be stressed out. I'm going to be worried about, executing everything properly. And I just kind of want to get through it. So I'm not in Brian's camp of wanting to be really, really tested by the DPE. I'd rather get through, pass, and then I'd rather rely on, just flying and experience and other pilots and, other flight instructors to really grow the experience.
Right. It also kind of goes back, though, to what we were saying earlier. And I do want to point out, I do agree with you. I agree that if you're flying out to flat land and you've got time, setting the autopilot, putting it on a heading and, reassessing the situation.
No, see, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying when you're in the heat of battle, when you're in Bravo, in IMC, and something's messed up, go to autopilot because you got.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm agreeing with that.
Oh, okay.
I'm agreeing with that. But I'm just saying, like, but here's the thing, like, if you're on an approach and you're trying to, get to an airport or whatever, and you really don't have a lot of time, you're not going to have time to
manually fly that magenta line.
Right. That's what you should do, is turn off the autopilot. But it's very dependent on what your situation is.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just like Brian said, so going back to what Brant just said with now that I'm wanting to do this professionally, I'm looking at doing this professionally. He's progressively getting tougher instructors, tougher DPEs, etc. Brant, you're not wanting to do this professionally, right?
No, I mean, I think I'd like to fly some cool planes, but on somebody else's dime would be great. But I'm not doing it professionally for sure. So
this is not a career maneuver for you, which is fine. You know what I mean? It's, but that's why you have the perspective you have. Because I'm in Brian's, like, I'm just like. I'm on Brian's side on this situation because I knew very early on I wanted to do this professionally. So I'm very glad that I got a very firm but fair DPE, and I had easy DPEs and hard DPEs, and even in training now with the airlines, there are really easy instructors and really tough instructors. And to be honest with you, I appreciate the tough instructors.
Sure.
Because I want to, push myself to go a little bit higher, I guess, in that realm, because this is like my professional thing. But
all right, so moving on, Brant, was probably a much better flight leaving Aviator Air and flying back to Colorado. How did that feel?
Oh, it felt great. Yeah. It was nice to accomplish it. I enjoyed the fact that it was so condensed, and honestly, I just really enjoyed the time with you and Brian, getting to know both of you even more, and going through the training and such. It was just the camaraderie and enjoyment out of it. So I would highly recommend, like Brian said, doing the buddy flying whenever possible. I think not only is it more enjoyable, because I do flying in a sense for kind of community. Everyone I've met within aviation has been a great person, easily befriend people in it. Everyone in the flying community that I've met would just about give their right arm for you and do anything that they could to improve, your life, the friendship, etc. So I've had nothing but positive experiences with flying, and just kind of coupling that with doing an accelerated course with buddies and getting everything that you can out of the training, getting everything that you can out of immersing yourself into it, as well as the friendship and camaraderie with it. Whether you're doing this like I am, for kind of personal and business enjoyment, or you're doing it professionally, I think it's advantageous to do it that way. So, but yeah, the flight home was great, knowing that, the pressure was now on you and Brian, and
That's right.
Yeah.
it was over for me.
So then Brian and I get ready, and I had a pretty good flight the day before. I felt solid going into the check ride. I was a little rougher than I thought it was going to be, but I did okay.
On the check ride itself, or are you talking about the flight
so
before?
The flight before gave me maybe a little bit too much confidence, maybe, and I felt like I had it down. And then there is no such thing as a perfect check ride, and you got to be able to.
Now hold up. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
You have to be able to ignore that in the heat of the battle and get it done. And so for me, that's what it was. It was a little bit tougher than I was expecting, but in the end, I did fine. I remember. So I went first on Friday morning, and Brian was going to be second. So Brian was there. So I go into my oral. I come out of the oral and I whisper some things real quick to Brian, and then we head out to fly. And then when I get done flying, I whisper some more things to Brian. So Brian, take us through your recap.
Yeah, your whispering made no difference in my ability.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so Dan had told me something that happened on his flight, and he's like, make sure you don't do X. And one of the very first thing I did exactly was what he had told me not to do.
Of course.
So, when Dan was doing his check ride, of course, Christy was there, and we're on FlightAware. Not like we're trying to cheat and figure out what we're going to do. We're stalking a little bit, but also we want to make sure our friend passes. And so we're like, okay, he's over at this airport. He's doing some maneuvers. If at any point he deviates and comes here, we know the check ride's over. And then so we're watching and we're listening on ATC, and we're hearing then there's a lot of traffic in the traffic pattern. So that had me a little bit getting nervous, going, okay, this is going to be not just super simple. Then you guys. So here's the thing: our DP was Joey Johnson. He doesn't give the same check ride to everybody. So you guys flew a VOR approach back into Grand Prairie Aviator Air, and you were telling me about this, and I was like, oh, I wasn't prepared for that. I thought you guys were over there doing approaches at Midway because we'd been practicing the RNAV approaches, and so I was like, okay, I got to go quickly figure out the VR approach.
We started pulling charts.
I know.
Well,
but we told you that no, it looks like you'll be able to do the RNAV.
Right.
We did the
that was
VOR
after
for a
the
specific
fact.
reason.
Sure, no, I
Right.
understand.
It was before he went up.
Oh,
Yeah.
It was before he went up.
Well, no. Before he went up, yeah. But while you guys, so the funniest part of watching your check ride was when you guys started flying toward Cleburne, and Brian's like, "Oh God, they're going to Cleburne now." So he starts panicking. He's like, "I needed plates," and so we start pulling up all the plates and charts for
God.
Cleburne.
I like to fly with paper, and I had paper for where I thought we were going to fly. And when I saw you guys going out to the west, I was like, I didn't print those out.
We didn't.
Right.
And we weren't going to Cleburne. We were just, flying the check ride. But
Yeah.
what happened is that Midway, where we'd all done our playground work and everything else on our landings at that airport at Midway, we get in there and we're doing our maneuver, and some guy cuts us off on final.
Yeah.
And
We were listening to
We
live
heard the
ATC.
exchange on live ATC. It was pretty funny.
And the DPE gets on the radio and says, "You cut us off." And the guy goes, "Well, quit taking such wide patterns." And
Joey's like, "Well, it looked like 1.3."
no, not look like it was.
It was
1.3
1.3
miles. So that's not wide.
DME on
and
my
by the
DME.
way, I'm a DPE.
Well, you know what's funny? He said 1.3 on my DME, and I was like, did he just throw out the DPE like flex? And then like 30 seconds later, he said, I'm a designated examiner. And then we started laughing because we're like, he absolutely threw out the DPE flex.
In some regards, it really helped me to get cut off, because now I knew the DPE was focused on something else and not me.
Well, now I know if I'm ever cut off in the pattern, I can just throw out, "You're talking to a DPE card." They don't know, because
Yeah.
it got real quiet after that.
Oh, the guy never responded
he
back.
never
He was gone
responded.
and he went somewhere else.
Leaving
Yeah.
the airport.
I
Last
don't
call.
even think
ADS-B
I
went
don't even
off.
think he made a last call. He just bounced out. We're like, okay, well that's
Yeah,
interesting.
there
I'm a
was no more
DPE.
call.
Every plane in the pattern just scatters.
All of a sudden, we had the airport to ourselves.
See,
It
that's
was
how you
amazing.
do it. That's how you go get your
New
pattern
radio
working.
call. I got a video I'm going to work on now, starting today.
All right, but it felt good finishing. It felt even better that I went in the morning when it was only 100, and you had to go when it was 112. So
Yeah. So my role in all of this was purely moral support, helping you guys last minute study, keeping Brian calm, letting him cry a little bit. And when I got there, it was about 100 degrees. And you got out of the airplane just drenched in sweat. And I told Brian, I was like, dude, are you going to be okay? And he's like, oh, like, I live for this. Like, this is fine. The heat doesn't
Heat's
bother
fine.
me. The heat doesn't bother me.
it bothers me.
Well, it wound up being the hottest day of the year.
Yep.
Up to that point,
Can we talk about something first though? Every time somebody got out of that airplane or taxied back, should we film or do we
Oh
not
my
film?
gosh, that
We're
was so
trying
funny.
to assess based on posture whether or not they passed or not, and then we're like, I mean, I want to
Oh,
film.
and I think I gave you a thumbs down.
You gave me a thumbs down. And I was like, oh crap! And then I was
I
like,
knew
I'm
he was
canceling.
playing.
I was like,
I knew he was playing
one,
at that
I'm not
point.
filming this, and two, I'm going to cancel my ride.
Yeah, because we were both standing out there, and I was
Holding
like,
cameras like kind of at a
I was
45
like, well,
degree
should
angle.
I? Brian goes, well, Dan would do it if it were you. And I was like, you know what? You're not wrong. So
So we got through it. Aviator Air was awesome. Reagan was awesome. Our DPEs were awesome, and all three of us were able to get our commercial add-on in record time,
7.5 for me, including the check ride.
and 7.5 for me. And so that was quite an experience.
It was if you take the heat away from it and our full-time jobs away from it, I think because there's so you got so many. I mean, at any given moment, I remember poor Reagan. He'd be like, "Okay, we're going to go in here and we're going to talk about some oral stuff," and then we would just take turns being on conference calls, leaving the room and stuff.
Right.
And what's funny is pilots, especially preparing for check rides, we were really good at compartmentalizing. Like, okay, I've got these maneuvers down. Now I'm going to focus on the oral portion, or I'm going to focus on the written portion, or whatever. And I remember Wednesday night, Reagan being like, "You guys need to get your V's like going through the packet." And I was like, I can commit to having this ready tomorrow. And so you give yourself 2 days to learn to fly and 1 day to go, I got to memorize V speeds. I got to memorize the combat thing or the drill thing or whatever. And so cramming. And then the next day, I'm like, how do I convince him that I can learn this in a night? You come back the next day and, of course I could, rattle it off to him. So it was, you kind of figure out what you're made of to some extent. Cause going into this, I was like, no way. And this is how I would do this rating again.
next time, I would recommend taking PTO, or something, time off
I tried to
to
talk
study
him into
full
that.
time.
I tried.
Oh, I tried. You saw, I was sending text to my boss and I was arguing with him.
You got 1 day off.
Yeah.
So yeah, and Brant, how hard was it for you balancing? You're running a big company, and trying. I guess you got minions who'll do your bidding.
Employees.
Yeah, it's it's funny because I said to everybody, I said, hey, I'm going to be in Dallas doing this flight training, so I'm going to probably be limiting my availability and so forth. And I think you guys experience the same thing. But when you tell everybody that,
The phone
suddenly
rings.
like the world catches on fire, and it's like you just can't get away from things, it seems. And so it's always comes at one time. Nothing ever, it's like my day is hijacked in a lot of different ways, but nothing ever seems to come at a reasonable amount, spread throughout the day. It's like everything's at 11 o'clock. Well, we're supposed to meet with Reagan at 11 o'clock to go over, this and this. Well,
And you're triple
we've
booked
got
for
to do this
conference
conference call.
calls.
Yeah. We have to do this. This client finally accepted, or this builder finally accepted this meeting. Can you make it? I'm like, well, yeah, we'll figure it out. So
Right.
as Brian said, we just kind of took turns of, all right, you go fly with Reagan now, and Dan, you get in the back seat, and I'll do my conference call, or I'll do this, stuff with work that I got to do, and then Dan would come in and start editing while Brian and I were flying. So it was just different things,
Well,
but
and
it worked out.
I remember, whether it was you flying or Brian flying, I was in the back observing,
There's me.
and we're taxiing to the run-up area, and
I'm supposed to be in a meeting.
my alarm goes off 10 minutes until important meeting. And I'm like, okay, you guys got this. I'm out of here. And I just exited the plane quickly and walked back to the FBO and took my meeting.
Well, I've heard that Dan's boss is crazy and makes him work all the time.
Yes.
He's a tyrant.
tiring.
I just
You know,
thought something.
total side note, but I don't know if you guys experience this. I'm sure you fly with your cell phones as I do, and they're on. You know, maybe not Christy, but anyway, I am batting 1,000 almost like every flight on final. I get a phone call.
Right.
I don't know how that works, but on every final approach, I get a phone call, and I'm like,
Airplane
"How does
mode
that
is a
work? How does
thing.
that happen?"
I do too, but it's usually from the tower.
Yeah.
From the Fisto.
Ryan, you're going to need to dial a number for us.
Yeah. So if I were watching this podcast, one of the things, because we were talking about the stress and the intensity and stuff, like let's talk a little bit about the schedule. What time we would show up. I mean, we were getting there as the sun was coming up every day
Yep.
and leaving when the sun was coming down. So if I'm watching this podcast and hearing this, what's a day in the life of an accelerated multi-training like?
Sun up to sundown for 4 days, fly 2 times a day, and a ton of ground school and in between that and we did have time to do conference calls and things like that with our day jobs, but we had to do them from the airport. We were at the airport sun up to sundown.
Yep.
And we even ate lunch there. They had a great cafe there next to Aviator Air at Grand Prairie. So we ate lunch there every day. It was that's what the life is like. But I love the intensive kind of like
Hair on fire.
Well, set this time up that we're just gonna knock this sucker out. I like that. I like having a deadline.
I do too. And it's like that in the airlines. So just for future reference, when your like MV and LOE are like basically your check rides, when they are going to be several weeks out. And you kind of have like a syllabus of things. We're doing this on this day, this on this day, this on this day. And you're just continually working toward that goal. So it keeps you focused instead of your instrument training where you're like, oh, I could push this off another week. You can't do that.
Yeah.
So I agree with you, Dan.
Okay, last thoughts.
I thank you for pushing me to do something I didn't think I could do.
You're welcome.
I really enjoyed the buddy system, the camaraderie that happened, the confidence you get from seeing other people struggle with the same thing you're struggling with, and going, okay,
It's
and then,
okay.
Yeah, it's okay. And then seeing other people be successful and going, okay, because Reagan said this from the get-go, everyone goes to their multi-check ride thinking I'm not ready. And that's how I was up until probably the very last flight going, I don't know how, but then we all did it. It was like, okay, he knew, and he's like, you're going to think you're not ready for this, but you're going to do fine. And he was right. So I thought it was a fantastic experience.
I think it was too, Brian, the fact that, when I passed, you and Dan were like, well, if Brant can pass, I mean, obviously we've got this.
Oh, we got this down. Yeah, well, I spoke to overconfidence.
So I'm glad I could give you guys that confidence, before you had to go on your flight.
Well, Brant, I didn't want to tell you,
ground
Dan and I didn't even have check rides. They said, oh, if Brant knows how to do this, we're just going to sign you guys off.
Oh my God, stop it.
We'll just go ahead and endorse you guys now. It's all good.
Yeah, that's how good Reagan is.
I think I was definitely taking on some of your sympathy stress. So
All right. Well, very good. It was great debriefing this. It's going to be one of our longer podcasts. For you guys out there listening on Spotify, Amazon, iTunes, or if you're watching and listening from the YouTube app for the podcast, this is a podcast. It's not about video. So, and the camera keeps overheating, so we've got that issue. But, I want to thank you guys for listening to the podcast. Don't forget our sponsors, like Colton Mortgage, coltontakingoff.com, also Flying Eyes. Use our discount code TAKINGOFF, all caps, one word, for 10% off. We've got 67 designs. I love these mounts for my iPhone and my cameras and my iPad in the plane. They're incredible. 67D.com. MPS, Marshall Protective Services, personal security elevated. And also Z-Vision, the brightest landing and taxi lights out there. All of these are in our description below for the YouTube side. And I feel like there was one more that I was just... Oh, Jerry Clemens at clemensinsurance.net. Jerry has saved me a lot of money.
you're usually so good at this.
I know.
I just let you take over because you're really good at this.
Well, we're almost 54 minutes into this podcast. So, all right, guys, thank you for watching or listening, and we'll see you next time on the Taking Off podcast.